In the short term, what it actually means for us, what most people are going to care about, is it's going to reduce our TABOR refunds by about $300 million a year. So
that's a lot.
Pretty close to what Proposition 121 would cut our taxes by. We would have our TABOR refunds reduced by that much if 123 passes.
So it's a tax increase.
It's effectively a tax increase. But the ballot says without increasing taxes, it says that in the blue book, without increasing taxes, which is a lie.
There's more on your ballot than just people. Yes, there are questions, including one I put on, so I'm a little biased on that. To talk about some of these, Ben Murrey from the Independence Institute. Thanks for being here.
John, thanks for having me.
All right, so the most important question on the ballot, of course, is Prop 121, which does what?
So 121 is similar to Proposition 116 2 years ago that we had on the ballot, which passed, which would lower the income tax rate. Now this time we're lowering it, hopefully, if voters adopt it, from 4.55% down to 4.4%.
All right, so small tax.
Small tax cut.
All right, I keep hearing, we can't do this, we can't afford it. Isn't this just a small tax cut compared to all the tax increases that have happened in the last few years? Fee increases?
Yeah, tax increases, fee increases. Really some of both. But this is just barely scratching the surface on all the windfall of new revenues the state's been getting for various reasons over the last several years. And what we're trying to do here is really just let Colorado workers, especially in this time of record inflation, keep a little bit more of their own money and give them a break. The government's budget has been growing at historic levels, and we think it's time to let Coloradans have a little bit more of their own money.
All right. We do this weird thing right now. We're flush with money. The state is flush with money, and so we're getting these refunds back. The governor would have you think that out of the generosity of his heart, he's writing you these checks, when in fact, he is constitutionally required to give you this money back. I don't quite get why we go through this weird game of collecting all this tax revenue so that they can hold on to it for a year, then to give it back to us. Part of the idea of this tax proposal, and yes, it was my proposal, is to just not collect it in the first place.
Yeah, so the latest economic forecast by the state came out last week. And one thing we saw for the first time is they're now projecting yet another year of TABOR refunds all the way through 2025. So that'll be 5 consecutive years where the state has had surplus revenue, so much revenue that TABOR mandates that they return a chunk of it back to taxpayers. And so what you're going to see if this tax cut actually gets adopted by voters is that it won't touch the state budget, at least for that forecast window, maybe beyond, at least according to current state projections. Now, it would help Coloradans right away and potentially even more in the future, because what it's going to do is going to allow Coloradans to keep that money in their pocket when they get their paycheck, rather than having to send it up to the government and wait until tax day for the government to send it back to them.
All right. Now, the Independence Institute has a voter guide. You can find it at thinkfreedom.org. You want more information on this, but this is a pretty simple, basic proposal. It's one of the few ones that you read and you can actually understand. It says, shall the tax rate be lowered from 4.55 to 4.4?
That's it.
Question mark.
That's all it says.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy to understand.
Very easy.
Help me with some of these that I don't quite understand. One of them, I think it's G, I'm not too sure if I got it, has something to do with tax tables. I don't get this. They want to publish tax tables. Should there ever be a change in tax? What is this?
So this is what this is really about. The left, let's just say, folks who want bigger government, are getting frustrated that citizens keep putting tax cuts on the ballot and citizens keep democratically lowering their own taxes. They don't like democracy. We've talked about this before. They're frustrated with democracy. So this
in contrast, just to be clear, in contrast, the legislature has continued to increase taxes by calling them fees. Usually when they want more money, they should go to the people under the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and say, can we tax you more? But since they know that the people will say no, they call them fees. So we have the mill levy fees and the faster fees, and now we've got things on our gas tax increase, which is called a fee, 27 cents every time you get a package from Amazon, 30 cents every time you get into an Uber. Now all fees that were not asked for. So we've responded by saying, well, would you like to cut your taxes a little bit just to counteract that a little bit? They don't like that.
Right. So you and Senator Sonnenberg put this measure on the ballot, and we're just giving citizens the opportunity to democratically vote themselves a tax cut after fee after fee after fee increase by the state without voter permission. And they're getting frustrated with these tiny little tax cuts we keep getting victories on. And what they want to do is put a tax table on the ballot title itself. So it'll actually be on your ballot rather than in the blue book. What they believe will happen is that voters will see this and they'll be more likely to vote against a tax cut for themselves. The reason why they believe this is because what the tax table would do is it breaks up the income brackets into something like 12 different arbitrary income divisions, right? So $0 to $15,000 or $15,000 to $30,000. And then they estimate how much somebody in a particular bracket will save from a particular tax cut.
All right, let me see if I got this right. This is the old class warfare.
Yes.
Showing that if a guy makes $1 million, well, obviously if there's a flat rate income tax cut, he's going to save a lot more than a guy who makes 10 grand a year. The 10 grand a year guy might save $15, whereas this guy might save $5,000.
So they're trying to appeal to the greed of lower earners. When they look at that tax table and they see the guy who makes $1 million a year is going to save, or let's just put it in simple terms. When they see that the guy who makes 10 times more than them is going to save 10 times more from a tax cut, they're appealing to the envy and greed of the lower earner to go, well, you know what, I'm going to reject the $60 I would get back because I don't want the other guy to get $600 back.
And because our ballots aren't long enough. So the question on 121 is, again, this tiny little short question compared to all the other long ones. So now we're going to try to make this a really long, bizarre question too.
Right, and there's more to it on Prop GG, right? So 121, if GG were already in effect, would have a tax table right on the title. Number one is that tax table's already in the blue book. So the long information blue book that voters can open up and learn more about the ballot measures, the tax table's already in there for Proposition 121. You'll see it in your blue book.
And furthermore, if you want to know what that is, you could just go to your last tax statement and figure out what that's going to save you.
Well, and that gets to the second point, which is the tax table is really misleading because everybody's business or individual or household family tax filing is unique and different. So what the table does is it makes you think so let's say I make $42,000 a year and I look and I go, oh, I'm in the $40,000 to $60,000 range here on this tax table. I'm going to save, $82. That actually is probably not true because everybody's tax situation is completely unique. And the table's misleading.
Right. You might make a lot of money, but you might have so many deductions you don't pay a lot.
Right.
Or you might only make this much, but you have no deductions. All right. Again, it's just more scare tactics to try to get people to say no. Isn't it amazing? For me, it's amazing that they don't respect us enough to ask our consent when they raise taxes by calling them fees. And now, when we ask people consent to lower taxes, they want to put in some sort of scare tactic. We'll see if that works. What's this other one about? I'm trying to see. It's a homeless.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. You're talking about Proposition 123, and that's
by the way,
one.
For people who don't know the difference between a proposition and a referendum and others, if I have this right, propositions are things that we, the people, put on the ballot. We gather signatures. It's a big, long, expensive, hard thing to do. Referred measures are letters, and they come from the legislature. So GG was something that the legislature put on. Doesn't cost them a thing. But when we go out and get signatures, it costs a lot of money in time, labor, volunteers, and a lot of cash to hire petition gatherers. Here, all they have to do is get 50 plus 1 votes in the legislature, and it's on the ballot. All right, so 123.
So 123 is a citizen-initiated measure that would require that a certain amount of income tax collections get earmarked for different homeless programs. Right? So, no, I'm sorry, not homeless programs, housing programs, okay, that would be administered at the local level. Now, what that means is that it would, if it would effectively reduce the amount of money that the legislature has to work with to do other things that they want to do. The ironic thing about this is a measure that's coming from the political left. I don't think it's a good idea for reasons we can get into. But what's interesting is a lot of Democrats in the legislature are actually opposing the measure too, because they don't like that citizens might say, hey, we want you to spend this amount of money this specific way. You're not allowed to spend it any other kind of way. We want you to spend it this way. The legislature wants to have that power, that control, right? So it's interesting that a lot of people on the left in the legislature actually oppose this measure that's coming from the grassroots left.
So where does the money come from that will be spent on affordable housing? By the way, if you want affordable housing, we need to get rid of these ridiculous urban growth boundaries. 99% of Colorado is not developed. That's why housing is expensive, because we squeeze them all in here. And so now we have to come up with weird, bizarre contortions of trying to tax people more to try to make other people's rent lower. It just gets worse and worse.
So, yeah.
But the point being here, if I understand it right, we're going to take money from from taxpayers and give it to localities to spend. Is that what 123 does?
Sort of. Now, the programs will be administered through the local governments, who will probably work with nonprofits to disperse the money in different ways for housing programs. But in the short term, what it actually means for us, what most people are going to care about, is it's going to reduce our TABOR refunds by about $300 million a year. So
that's a lot.
Pretty close to what Proposition 121 would cut our taxes by. We would have our TABOR refunds reduced by that much if 123 passes.
So it's a tax increase.
It's effectively a tax increase. But the ballot says without increasing taxes, it says that in the blue book, without increasing taxes, which is a lie, because it reduces our TABOR refunds.
How did they get away with that? They have done this now ever since TABOR passed. They say without raising taxes, but it takes away your refunds. So you're paying more in taxes. The government gets more money. So if money goes from taxpayer to government, that sure seems like an increase in taxes.
Yeah. Anytime something happens, whether it's through the legislature or a ballot measure, that reduces our TABOR refunds, it's effectively a tax increase. And that's what Proposition 123 is. It's a tax increase.
Your point, though, and I want to make sure I've got this one covered. Even Democrats, some, don't like this, because the idea of the legislature is we hire them to make these priority decisions. They get to decide where the money is. We're going to put money here, we're going to put money there. If we start passing these laws that say, we're going to tell you where the money goes, then why do we need them?
That's right.
By the way, why do we need them?
Well, I think the idea of representative government as opposed to direct democracy in all things, is a good thing. I think it's good to have representative government. But I think it's great that Colorado has this direct democracy aspect with these ballot measures. It's the only way that citizens are able to get things done, like tax cuts for themselves with the legislature that we have.
Remember, without direct democracy, we wouldn't have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We wouldn't have term limits. We wouldn't have open records and open meetings. We wouldn't have these things that legislators, that lawmakers hate, because it takes a little power away from them. People want to get more information about these and others. Where do they go?
So if you go to thinkfreedom.org, that's thinkfreedom.org, you'll see a ballot guide up on our website. If it's not up now, it'll be up really soon. And then you can go to the fiscal tab on our website, and you'll see a lot more on the fiscal policy, the tax stuff.
Ben, thanks. So there are a few other fun things on your ballot. I wanted to talk about some of the Denver issues because they're pretty interesting. Joshua Sharf has done some work on those. Joshua, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure, John. Thank you for having me on.
All right, so I put things on the ballot statewide. And in order to do that, I've got to go and ask the mercy of something called the Title Board. And it's a weird bureaucratic thing where I have to go ask these three people, Mother, may I ask the people of Colorado to change the law? And they've got two jobs. One, they have to say, this is a single subject. And if it is a single subject that I'm asking the people, then they get to decide the description that is put on the ballot. And I often disagree with them, but that's what it is. What's the process in Denver?
So Denver right now, there's no single subject rule, for instance. What you circulate a petition, And if you get the requisite number of signatures, then it goes on the ballot.
So I could go into Denver and say, put together a proposal that says we're going to cut taxes in half, and we're going to force everyone to wear their underwear on the outside of their clothes.
Yes, you could
put it in the same thing.
Yes, you could do that. And then if you get enough signatures, then it can show up on the ballot. That's right. So there's a proposal this year, and I don't remember the number. There's a proposal this year that would change that. That would change that to more resemble what Colorado has to do. What you have to do for Colorado. There would be the clerk and recorder, I believe, would end up looking at this, making sure that there is a single subject. So any citizen initiative would have to go under a single subject, and they would also set the title rather than having the citizen set the title on this.
So when it goes to the title board is a 3-member title board for statewide issues, and it's a representative from the legislature, a representative from the AG's office, and a representative from the Secretary of State's office. So you get a representative from all three. And at first I was very skeptical of their evil intent, but over the years I've come to realize they're trying their best. They for the most part don't play politics for the most part. And
although we should remember that there have been some instances where things have been struck down, where they appear to be single subject, and yet the title board has said, no, this somehow violates the single subject rule. So they have on occasion thrown their weight around a little bit.
Right, and that you can appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can override them. My biggest frustration, this is just a complete aside, is that as a citizen, I go through them. They decide one single subject, and then they give a descriptor. The legislature, willy-nilly, can put anything on the ballot, and they can decide if it's single subject, and they can write the title themselves, what we read on the ballot. And so they can put things that are lies, like without raising taxes,
that's right.
and to make unicorns happy and children well-fed, shall we do this ridiculous thing? And it goes on the ballot.
What do you have against well-fed children?
I hate children, as you know. And if I could make a reform, I would make sure that anything that goes on the ballot that I have to go through the title board, the legislature has to do too. Who are the representatives that they have to go through on this proposal in the city and county of Denver? Is it just the clerk and recorder, or is there a balance on this new title board?
Yeah, as I understand it, it's the clerk and recorder who will make the determination.
Doesn't seem like a good check and balance system.
They have to talk to their attorneys. They have to seek input from. I'm not sure if it's the city council, but I'm not sure if it's the city council. But they may have to talk to these but ultimately I think the clerk and recorder.
So that's a conflict of interest right there, because the beautiful thing about the Citizens Initiative is that it's there to do things that elected officials will never do themselves.
Right.
Yeah, we have on the state of Colorado, we have term limits. We have open records and open meetings laws. We have ethics laws, things that elected officials, we have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
Tabor, for that matter, yeah, right.
These things, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, you would never put these restrictions on, these safety valves on yourselves. And that's why people want them, elected officials hate them no matter what.
Yeah, it's funny, and you see that in the way that these things that initially are set up as guardrails very quickly become obstacles to be gotten around, right? So Tabor, which was intended to put certain limits on, suddenly becomes a game of how can we increase taxes, or how can we move money out from under the Tabor cap, or what can we do now within the law that we wanted to do anyway. The Tabor is clearly designed to keep us from doing, but how can we do it anyway? Or you have, you're talking about, CORA, the open records, which frequently organizations, they just, the records don't exist, prove that they exist by taking us to court.
Or they exist, but in order for us to get them, you'll have to pay this much money.
Right, because it's going to be thousands of man hours to go back into it's like Jack Benny's vault, to go into, going down the stairs and across the river and, through the guardian of hell. It's impossible to get this stuff.
You are no older than I am, but in your soul, you're old enough to know who Jack Benny is. That's what I love about you.
Yeah, well, there we go. But well.
Oh, wow.
But
I'm thinking.
Yes, yes, and so that they quickly become things to be gotten around, which indicates that they never would have put these restrictions on in the first. But now I will tell you that some of the citizens' initiatives in Denver are just terrible. I mean, it's the source of some terrible ideas as well. But at least there's the possibility that you have good ideas. At least there's the possibility that you put restrictions on things. I think it would be fascinating. I'll give you an example, and I have no reason to think that this will happen anytime in the near future. But Aurora, the Aurora City Council, is getting ready, potentially, to require fiscal notes on things that they put in front of them. Most cities do not have. Now, the state legislature has a fiscal note requirement. If you're going to pass legislation, you have to, what's the effect on income and what's the effect on outgo for I think however many, 5 years out or something like that, in order to so then you have this effect of the budget.
That's what the legislature does with bills.
Right.
So if a legislator puts forward a bill, it goes to legislative council, and they put on a fiscal note. What's the cost of what you're proposing?
Right. Most municipal governments don't have anything like that. And Aurora is getting ready, in all likelihood, it will start requiring that. I think it would be fascinating to have a citizen, the Denver City Council will never do anything like that. I mean, you ask about, what's the cost of this regulation? They look like you just grew another head. What do you mean cost of regulation? How am I supposed to know that? I just know it's a good thing. And so to have a citizens initiative to require that for things coming out of Denver, I think would be magnificent. But the city council never do it itself.
Isn't there a built-in safety mechanism in an initiative? Because unless you're changing, on the state side, if you change the Constitution, the only way you can change it back is with a vote of the people. But if you change something statutorily, the legislature can change it the very next session. And if you change something in the city and county of Denver, you're changing an ordinance. And the city council can, at their very next meeting, change it back.
Maybe, but you could have you could have an initiative that would change the charter. So that's the other thing, is that right now the rules for how the title is set are done by the charter. This would change it so that it's just done by ordinance.
And tell me if I've got this right. Colorado State, we have a constitution, and the constitution is the foundation, and the statutes are how things are run. These are easy to change, hard to change. In the city, you have a charter, hard to change. Ordinances, easy to change.
Right. No, okay. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so the charter is sort of serves as the city's constitution.
I guess, since you're a little skeptical of this proposal.
A little bit. I don't like the idea of taking power away from citizens and giving it to the people that they're trying to, the thing that you're taking the power away is intended to restrict, to give the people a chance to have a check on the government, and now the government is going to turn around and remove that check. I don't like that at all. The
30 years that I've been involved in the initiative process, it has only gone in one direction. That is, the legislature continues to chip away at people's right to petition their government. They make it more expensive, they make it more onerous, they make the regulations harder, they make the petitioning process more expensive, and it keeps getting harder and harder and harder and harder. And now it's harder to change the Constitution so that fewer and fewer people can do it, and only very wealthy interests can get involved. And it only makes sense. The entrenched interests, the legislature doesn't want the competition. They certainly don't want the rabble telling them what their business is.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. I mean,
I want to make sure we have some time for the other stuff. What else is on the city ballot?
Yeah. So one of the other measures is it's actually in that same measure. Ironically, the same measure that would require a single subject, that would impose a single subject rule, also includes moving back the deadline for signatures for mayoral candidate or other citywide candidacies. So instead of having being due 55 days before, it would be due 75 days before. Now
so you're running for mayor, you have to get your petitions in 25 days earlier.
Yeah, and that about 20 days earlier. What's happened is that they also moved back in the last election cycle. We moved back the election day for the first election for citywide offices as well. I think my fear is that the combination of these things would end up moving cumulatively. You would move the signature deadline from like late May to mid-March. These are done in odd-numbered years. Right? These elections are done in odd-numbered years, in spring of odd-numbered years. That comes right after usually very contentious gubernatorial and statewide elections and or presidential elections. Right, so you might have a senatorial election. These are what's going to soak up all the oxygen, and it's going to make it. I think it makes it more difficult for candidates to get on the ballot. I think it makes it more difficult for people to challenge,
so
and
words,
people who are better organized.
You've just
to
been
begin
through
with.
an ugly presidential election. Trump gets reelected. The world's on fire, and somebody's going to say, "I want to be mayor of Denver," and have to collect signatures basically at the same time that Trump is being sworn in.
Well, it's not just that. I think in order to really be an effective candidate, you have to set this up much earlier than when you're just collecting signatures. You have to get some level of publicity prior to that. It's already difficult enough to break through what's going on in the election leading up to November of the even-numbered year, and then if there's any dispute.
You're campaigning at the same time.
Yeah, you're campaigning at the same time this other stuff is going on.
What I've never understood is why the city and county of Denver has their elections on an odd year, half a year before the major election time. So why they don't have November elections on even years, I've never quite understood.
Tradition, John.
Tradition!
I don't know.
What's a bad tradition?
I don't. I think it creates problems. I think part of it, and to be fair, I don't know the reason for originally doing it that way. I don't know how long it's been done that way. I would guess that they would have argued at the time that it lets it sit separately because these are nonpartisan elections, because they are different. You want to have attention focused on them separately from the national or the statewide elections, the big, sort of what we think of the big glamour elections.
You know what, just a little bit of time left. Let's go to the state ballot real fast. There's a couple of proposals with E and F. If I recall, E and these are brought forward by the state legislature.
Yeah, they're referendum.
And E is to provide some type of incentive for Gold Star parents.
Families. Gold Star widows.
Gold Star widows.
Yeah.
These are people who lost their spouse in military actions. And what benefit would they get?
Yeah, so this is an extension of the homestead exemption, the senior homestead exemption. So as it stands now, if you're over a certain age and you've been in your home for 10 years, there's a certain amount. It's like the first $200,000 gets, 50% of the first $200,000 of assessed value gets is tax exempt. Right. Yeah, and so that was extended by a referendum. By referendum, I want to say 2006. I'm not entirely certain of that.
Something like that.
To military to military as well. This would extend it to surviving spouses of Gold Star of people who had died either directly in military action or as a result of injuries or illnesses sustained because of their service. So right now, if for instance you have one spouse is old enough to receive the exemption, and the other spouse is not, then and the older spouse dies, the younger spouse is entitled to continue receiving the exemption. They're not going to kick the widow out of her house just because her older husband died. This would essentially do the same thing and say, somebody who has died, we're going to make this a spousal exemption as well.
Sure sounds nice, but it also sounds expensive.
Probably not all that expensive. I don't remember what the fiscal note attached to it was, but it turns out not to be all that much money. And anything that lowers taxes or reduces the amount of money coming into the government especially for people who are, even if it sounds like special pleading, this is a worthy and sympathetic group, and I think it's not unreasonable to give them a little bit of break on property tax.
What's F do?
F currently in the state constitution, in order to be a charitable organization that runs gambling, runs like a casino night with real money, not with like play chips, but with real money, you have to have been in existence for 5 years. This would reduce, and people can't receive. Nobody can. All the workers have to be volunteer. Okay. What this would do is this would allow. It would reduce in the Constitution. This is all in the state constitution, which seems like an odd place for it, don't you think? We talk about the Constitution being like basic rules. Anyway, this would reduce that to 3 years, and then allow the legislature to change it to whatever they wanted to change it to.
Good idea, bad idea?
I personally think I'm not, heavily against it, but I think it's probably a bad idea. I think that organizations should have to be around for a while if they're going to be doing games of chance where it's possible to kind of fiddle with the dice or fiddle with the roulette wheel or whatnot. That it's unlikely they do this if they've been around for a while and they establish themselves first as a legitimate charitable organization. And then say, okay, and then by the way, we want to have bingo night. I think that's
those
reasonable.
of us who have always dreamt of being, Rick's Cafe, I don't want to stick around 5 years. I want to get this done now.
Have you tried 22? Yes.
have you tried
22? Yeah.
I think, have you tried 20? Man, you are old, and I love that about you. Joshua, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, John.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.